All right, so anyway, this works better. And so what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about John M. Davis. When Don and I were working on the calendar, Bob looked it over and he mentioned about the grade cross elimination projects. And so we revised one of the captions, but even under Mr. Davis, the Lackawanna you're going to see eliminated well over 100 grade crossings between Elmira and Syracuse and all over the railroad. So let's take a little quick trip through. I'll do this until we run out of time, and so we may not get through all the slides. Lackawanna, over its history, has had 5 notable presidents from Samuel Sloan, and each president has some sort of significant era that they create. Samuel Sloan put the railroad together. Mr. Truesdale took it from two streaks of rust to America's most highly developed railroad. Mr. Davis brought it through the Depression. Railroad never went bankrupt, and its history may not have paid dividends during the 1930s, but the Lackawanna never went bankrupt. Mr. White would dieselize the railroad, take it to the Second World War, and introduce the B.B. Snow. And finally, Perry Shoemaker, I think probably had the toughest job. He took the railroad through the 1950s with the Thruway and the Seaway and Mohawk Airlines and the Hurricane. And as Bob said this morning about paying for the upper Hackensack River Bridge, and that they had to sell all their nickel plate holdings to pay for that bridge. So I have a lot of respect for Mr. Shoemaker, and actually in his last years I was able to chat with him many times. So we start in 1925. William Truesdale came to Lackawanna in 1899. He's been in charge of the railroads in those years, and so in June 1925 he asked the Board of Managers that he'd like to resign. And of course, during those years, the Lackawanna, as Don mentioned, it was incredibly wealthy, and it became the most highly developed railroad in the country. So Lackawanna was looking for a president, and they turned to John M. Davis, who had worked for a variety of railroads. His last job had been the general manager of the B&O's operations in New York Harbor, Staten Island Rapid Transit. And so he was happy to be back on the railroad. And so during his administration and leadership, Lackawanna would continue a large variety of projects: the Harrison-Kingsland Cutoff, four-tracking the Booten Line, the Lower Hackensack Lift Bridge, which Bob showed pictures of this morning, the suburban electrification, the Big Six warehouse. They got continually new locomotives, first diesels, grade crossing projects continued. Even though we were in the Depression, the Lackawanna kept on investing in their property, which had always been a tradition. And so one of the first projects to be completed was the Harrison-Kingsland Cutoff. It was built across the New Jersey Meadows from near Kingsland Station to Kearney Junction and Harrison Yard. And these are from the Steamtown collection. This is at the east end of Harrison Yard. The one leg is going towards Kearney Junction. There's another one going towards Kingsland. Like everything on the Lackawanna, it's done in a big way. The line, except for where it's going through Kingsland into the station area, was grade separated with no grade crossings. This area here, they needed a tremendous amount of fill, and so they dug out part of the embankment there, which is the ridge, and they used that to get earth. And then later during the Second World War, this would be a large, they would call this the Lend-Lease yard. There'd be a yard put here, and so whilst tanks and trucks and everything you could think that we were shipping to Europe was waiting to be loaded onto ships. There was a railroad yard here. This is the overpass for the Erie Greenwood Lake Branch, which is just east of the station there at Arlington. DB Bridge is to the right. Mountain View is to the left. And there, the line is in service, and there's a freight train coming from Harrison towards Kingsland. It also, you could come, as you approach Kingsland, there was a junction switch there as on the map. You could go back towards Secaucus Yard. So this relieved congestion at West End Junction for trains that were going to go to the Morristown line. They would bring them this way, and that way they'd come on to the Morristown line after going through Harrison Yard. 1926, New York State had passed the Kaufman Act 3 years earlier, prohibiting the operation of steam locomotives in the city of New York, and so the Lackawanna had to take this seriously, so they bought their first diesel, the 3001. It was assigned to 25th Street, South Brooklyn, and so they also bought a diesel for their company, the Harlem Transfer, but this is at South Brooklyn. If you look in the back, there was a rather large coal trestle there for Burns Brothers. Also, they had an operation at the Wallabout Terminal in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. In that location, they decided they did not want to send a diesel, but they electrified it. And so this is a Bob Collins photo of the switcher working at the Wallabout Terminal. Unfortunately, it was next to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and during the Second World War, the Navy condemned the yard. And in its last year of operation, in that Christmas, they moved over 50,000 Christmas trees through this yard. So my uncle worked as an extra clerk there. It's not a very big yard. It's probably worthy of a presentation in itself. You know, dieselization continues. They got the 400s from General Electric. There's a Bob Collins photo of one of the switchers, probably on an employee train running from Kingsland Shop and West Secaucus Yard into Hoboken. I thought it was an interesting photo to see a switch engine pulling a passenger train. Of course, they're one of the first companies to buy diesel switchers from Electromotive Diesel. Actually, Electromotive Diesel put a brochure out that featured the Lackawanna's operations of these new diesel switchers. They also got switchers from Alco, and so when Mr. Davis came to the Lackawanna, there were no diesels, and when he left in 1940, there would be over 40 diesel switchers working on the railroad. There were no mainline locomotive diesels, but they had a fleet of diesel switchers across the railroad. Another big project that he did, every year there's something going on. The Pennsylvania Railroad because of the dock bridge in Newark, the Jersey Central because of Newark Bay, the Lackawanna because of their bridges. They went to Washington to talk to the War Department about getting a timeout during the evening and morning rush hours to give passenger trains preference, and the roads would have to open in the bridge. Hudson County politicians said, no, boats go first. So the Lackawanna did a study, and they found that if they raised this bridge 40 feet, they could reduce the number of bridge openings from 40 or 50 a day to 6 or 7. So this is the original Lower Hack swing bridge. And of course, the other problem Lackawanna had is that it was 3 tracks on each side of the bridge. The bridge was only double track. So they went with that they were going to build a 3-track vertical lift bridge. There's another view of the of the original lower Hack swing bridge. We're looking east, Jersey City, the gas tanks that were there for many years, you can see them in the background. These are some of the engineering drawings. If you look, whoops. Where's the pointer? If you look in the bottom here, you can see the bottom diagram is looking down, you can see the 2-track line of Norris and Essex with 3 tracks on each side, and the new bridge going in. And there's another view. They actually to get that 40 feet, they actually started raising the tracks as soon as the railroad came under Sanford's Crossing, east of milepost, just west of milepost 3. There's another view. This is an incredible machine. And I remember Bob mentioned this morning about big ships coming, and I remember in the early 90s when I was working for Transit, one of those big tar ships, they had some sort of confusion with the tugs going out. The bridge was closed and the tugs let the tar ship go through, and the bridge got hit on the track 3 side. It punctured the main lift span through the track, all the way through track 3, but we still had tracks 1 and 2. And so once we got the bridge locked up, because the bridge had been unlocked, getting ready to open, and so underneath that, on the main movable span, there's large pneumatic piston bridge locks, one for each track. And so we had to get under there and force those bridge locks in so we could get the signals to get the trains over. And of course it happened at like 4:30 in the afternoon. There it is right there. You can see they're starting to raise the tracks. The original line is to the left, and this is going to become the new line. There's another view. You can see the elevation difference between the swing bridge and the new vertical lift. And of course, with all vertical lift bridges, they're built in the open position, which of course doesn't make it easier because you got to lift everything to the top. And there's the swing bridge. Of course, it was mentioned that I work for Dick Balkin, and so when I interviewed for the job, Dick said to me, "Are you afraid of heights?" And of course, no, I'm not afraid of heights, of course. So one day he tells me, "Well, we have engineers here, we're getting ready for the re-electrification, and they take them out to the lower Hack." So I take them down, get on a train, I stop the train, and we get off. And I'd been across the lower Hack many times, and I'd been to the bridge captain's bungalow. And so I take them out there, and we go up to the bridge bungalow, and the engineers say, "Well, we want to see the top of the bridge." And I said, "What?" And they said, "Well, you need to take us to the top." Well, Copper's Cove used to be next to that bridge. And what a thrill it was. NJ Transit's rebuilt it, but the staircase and the ladders were so corroded from the coke works, you were afraid you were going to put your foot through the steel work. So much for saying about fear of heights. There's what's called the bridge captains. The bridge captains. And it has a full interlocking machine because it had D-rails and it had pneumatic locks and it had an air compressor plant, and just a remarkable machine.
Whose photo was that?
I had that one. It's not a black and white. It's not black and white photo.
Yeah.
And that. This is an American bridge company. I had to go back and put the credits in. And that. So I think this is a historical architectural engineering record photo.
It's a cool shot.
Yeah. It's almost like the control gondola on a Zeppelin.
Yeah.
This photo is American Bridge Company. This American Bridge Company built the bridge. And of course, other things continue, starting in, from 1924, 1925, Lackawanna starts to put in, to expand the Booten line. The Booten line had passing sidings at different locations, usually with an interlocking tower to control the passing sidings. And so this is Passaic, which is, we used to have a job called Patterson, you know, AC roustabout. And so this is at Passaic, Bloomfield Avenue. This picture is in the Steamtown Archives. And, you know, talking with John Williver and looking at track charts and things, we knew that there was a tower at Little Falls, but I'd never seen a photo of it. And so the other day, I was going through the photos and looking at this photo, which was marked in the Steamtown records as Totowa, not Little Falls. I went and looked to see, well, what is that Totowa? And I realized looking at it, it's taken from a train, that there's a tower. And that's Little Falls Tower, which is at Union Avenue in Little Falls. And
Yeah, that's after it was closed.
yes, it's boarded up. Maybe you've seen this.
Girls Reformatory is on the right there.
Okay. And of course, you can see there's a signal mast with the semaphores down on it already. You know, Jack Emmerich, you know, grew up in Booten, and so I grew up in Denville, and so Booten line was always one of my favorite lines, and so, you know, looking at Booten, this was before it was four-tracked. There's many more photos on this. We could do a program just on the Booten line project. This is between Denville and Dover, approaching, you know, Franklin Avenue.
It was always said that that was a former turntable, and I never was able to confirm that.
Okay, I wouldn't doubt it. You know, it's a funny bridge, and but I don't know
It looks like a turntable turned upside down.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It's like a box starter, you know?
If you look there, you can see it almost has a hump. This is at Lincoln Park. The four-track is done. The tower. This is looking west towards the station and the tower, and this keeps on cutting out. This is always, you know, it's amazing to look at this railroad. This is at Tawaco. And of course, I grew up in Denville, the Rainbow Lakes section of this. And I used to hang out on the Fox Hill Road. But in the 1920s, it was Pear Tree Road. And that house is still there today. If you go into Rainbow Lakes and you take a left at the firehouse and you start up Rainbow Trail, that house is still there. But look at that railroad. You know, it's like the Northeast Corridor.
Pristine.
That's where, when you were calling the flagman in from track 103, it was
Yes.
a difference.
Yeah. And so, and of course, this is, you know, the duck under, which is still there if you want to go climbing through the trees and the debris. When I first went to work for the EL in '72, 1 and 2 were still in service up on the top. Of course, the duck under was gone. The passenger trains operated on this track, and there was a set of crossovers up at Rainbow Lakes in the evening that the trains would cross over from 1 to 2 onto that track. If they didn't stop at Denville, they went straight through. And so it was amazing to see what they did at Denville. This, of course, is Pear Tree Road, which is right there at Rainbow Lakes. The electrification, the Board of Managers approves it in 1928. I thought this was an interesting photo because it shows the catenary structures going in prior to the stringing of the wires. And Andy Kostick always said that if you look at some of the catenary structures at the signal bridges, that they were constructed this way because the railroad expected to electrify, but they were also constructed so that they could be dismantled and the fourth track could be put in. So if you look at certain signal locations on the railroad, you'll see that they sometimes have these lattice work structures. So of course, there's a suburban electrification. We've seen this picture, I'm sure, before, but there's Mr. Davis on the left, Thomas Edison in the middle, and William Truesdale is on the right. And the electrification, very well thought out, just really bad timing. It never reached the full concept, because they would have electrified over to Scranton and branches. This is working in the electrical department. We had a lot of interest and knowledge in this building, because when this building was finally completed, it was fed with power from West End substation on the 27W line. So they built this warehouse. They call it the Big Six because it has 6 stories. It's the largest warehouse at the time for any railroad on the East Coast. And it has tracks coming into it on the 2nd floor and trucks on the 1st floor. It's still there today. It's still in use. It's not fed from West End substation, but the building is still there, and you can see the 6 upper floors of the building. Frank Flynn, who was a terminal train master superintendent, one of the leaders at early New Jersey Transit, when he started out on the railroad, he said they used to actually have automobiles shipped there, and they'd store them for car dealers in New York on the upper floors until they were ready for them. It has tremendous elevators in it, so that you could move stuff from floor to floor. Unfortunately, the Warehousemen Association felt that it was a violation of the Elkins Act for the Lackawanna to own a warehouse, because when they built it, they set it up as a separate company. It's a Lackawanna Warehouse Company. And so they claimed that it was illegal for a railroad to own a company that they had business dealings with. And so after many legal battles and changing economics, the railroad would eventually sell the building. Moving on, Mr. Truesdale used to believe the safest grade crossing was the one that wasn't there. This was in the result of the accident with the trolley car in 1903 at the Sheffield Avenue crossing, which is now at the east end of the Roosevelt Avenue cut. So, like I said, during Mr. Davis's tenure, the Lackawanna would continue eliminating grade crossings almost up to the beginning of the Second World War. This is at Elmira. It's interesting, Kennedy Valve is still there. So you can see the temporary right-of-way to the left and the new right-of-way going up on the elevation. This is at the east end of the grade crossing separation project. Of course, if you look at this, you're going to see this style underpass on the Boonton line, Morristown line, all over the Lackawanna, that they always had a set, distinct look to their underpasses. Of course, there's the new elevated Elmira station. The original station was built, this happened about 30 years or so after the first station. There you go again, another view. The station building stayed in place, and then they elevated the tracks through the station. And there's a picture when it's done. And so that smoke you see is an engine waiting for a westbound passenger train. On some passenger trains, before they got the larger motive power, they would change engines at Elmira. Other grade crossing elimination projects, working at Summit Sub. This was just west of the substation. It was originally the first grade crossing on the Gladstone Branch or Passaic, Delaware. This was the Springfield Avenue crossing. That building is still there. The Providence Station is still there, but the street is dead-ended at the railroad. There's what it looked like. It's, even after the electrification, the Lackawanna kept on eliminating grade crossings. They took out Valley Road at Berkeley Heights. They took out High Street Summit. They took out Danford Road, Madison. They kept on, even after the electrification was in, they kept on taking grade crossings out. There's, the siding is blocked, and they're putting the abutments in. And of course, there it is, finished. I think it was a mistake on the part of the railroad to cut the siding back. It would be certainly helpful many days that you could, there were crossovers down at West Summit that you could go from the siding on the track number 2, so it basically gave you more options and gave you another siding on the Gladstone Branch. We have the Depression going on. I think, just must have been overwhelming to see the value of everything just stop and crash. And so even as, like I said, the Lackawanna continued to invest in their property. They modernized equipment. I've got a couple slides, and so I'm going to keep on going here. I want to watch my time. We have to do a business meeting. One of Mr. Davis's triumphs was he was the president of the Eastern Railroad's President Conference. And so it was made up, it was a forerunner of the American Association of Railroads. And so you can see the number of railroads that belong to this. And of course, they built a pavilion or exhibit at the 1939 World's Fair, which is down in the lower left-hand corner next to the Long Island Railroad. And they brought railroad set equipment to be displayed, and they had a large pageant there that they put on. So if you look in the background there, you'll see there's an 1150 class Hudson that the Lackawanna sent there. There's Mr. Davis with representatives of the New York State, or the New York World's Fair Committee, architects and engineers looking at this there. And so there's the Trilon and Perisphere, and there's different exhibits. There was a quadrant of the fair that was called transportation, and so it had more than just the railroad exhibit. Ford was there, General Motors, Chrysler, and so there's that. And there's Mr. Davis with Grover Whalen, the chairman of the New York World's Fair, turning the first shovel full of earth for the Railroads on Parade exhibit. So the Lackawanna, I think it's, well, respected locomotive. They had the 1150 class. So the 1151 was withdrawn from service. It was renumbered in 1939, and it was sent to the World's Fair. What would you say?
Mike Delvecchio is not with us anymore. I respected Mike. He studied the Lackawanna as much as I ever did, but we always had a controversy as to whether or not this was maroon. And he's saying the people at Steamtown just did that, and since then people colorized it. I saw a 16 millimeter movie of the World's Fair, and in the background was the Lackawanna's Hudson, and there was a maroon stripe one. I've never been able to re-find that photo. So it's just my word against his. But if you look at all the black and white photos of that engine, keep it there. This black here, and then this black on the running board are never the same. All I'm saying is he had his opinion and I have my opinion.
Well, the other thing, you know, was one of the advertisements that I had at the beginning. That looks maroon in that.
It is, okay. He's saying that that's a colorized photo. I can't argue with that.
Well,
That's all I'm saying, is he's saying it's and it probably is a colorized photo, but just two opinions. I know he's not here to back up his, and I understand that. I'm just throwing that
We'll
out.
carry that on someday. We'll carry that discussion on someday. But, you know, I just, you know, looked at, but this was in one of the brochures for the Railroads on Parade. It had a rather large booklet that you may have seen, or you may
He had a little tiny, when I say tiny, smaller than my fingernail on my pinky, and he said, "This is proof." And he had this little 16 millimeter, no, it wasn't 16, I don't know, it was 8 millimeter or whatever it was, chunk of film. And I looked at it through a magnifying glass, and I said, "I don't see anything." He said, "No, it's not.
One of the New York Historical Societies has color photos, and I think they're actual color. And it's a different shot because it includes the Trilon and the Perisphere on the tender. And that one, I think, shows it black. And that's the one that I
Shows it
put on
black?
the list. So Paul.
Okay.
I've seen it in green, I think, too.
So yeah, it's funny.
And it could have been a different year, you know, there was the 39 and there was the 40.
39 and 40. That here is
It's actually, after the fair closed in the fall of '39, the locomotive went back into service on the Lackawanna. And it would come back, and when it came back the next year, it was the 1940.
So I think it's very possible that.
And they uglified it in my
This black and
estimation.
white picture, you can see that the Pocono Mountain route is a different shade than the,
Yeah, with two different blacks.
And also, the
okay.
PRR S1s had a red tree on them. The S1s had a red band.
You know, another Lackawanna exhibit was the 952, which of course is in St. Louis. It was, I think it was a vision of many, John Williver, Perry Shoemaker, that this engine go to Steamtown. And if you look and I know there was big lawsuits and back and forth, but it says at the bottom, at the close of the fair, the engine will be presented to the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society. So, because many, Tom Tabor, Dick Lone, Homer Hill, they all volunteered to restore this engine, to send it to the World's Fair. There were many others, but they're just people that I know that were involved in it.
What color was that one?
That was green. You can tell it's green.
Now, I would say it was black. And know that it's painted out in St. Louis, but I don't think it's painted the way the Lackawanna would have had it. And I thought it was interesting, you know, the article mentions that it had been assigned to South Orange prior to the electrification, and then it went to the S&U, and that's where it was before it went to the World's Fair. So it survived. Another odd thing that the Lackawanna sent was a refrigerator car, and we sometimes don't think of the Lackawanna with the refrigerator cars, although I know there were refrigerator trains that I remember.
Well, that was
seeing.
a whole display
Yeah,
train.
but they didn't, it's not the whole train. It's just, they didn't send the whole train. The train is made up of cars.
Well, this car right here was numbered 1939.
This car, yes. And there was D&H.
Yellow.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about the whole car.
And of course, Lackawanna took the fair as an opportunity to try to generate additional riders on the train and the fair. And then, of course, everything comes to change, as somebody mentioned. And so in November 1940, Mr. Davis said he was going to ask to retire, and they went with the Lackawanna's tradition that had started with Samuel Sloan, that the current president would become chairman of the board and there'd be a new president. And the Lackawanna had interviewed William White. He had been at the head of the negotiating teams in 1937 for negotiating union contracts for the Eastern Railroads, and he had also been the general manager of the eastern end of the Erie. And so it was announced that he would become the president on January 1st, 1941. And of course, the clouds of war were starting.